So, yep, we're here. It's the third weekend. As you'll remember from yesterday, what we're really focusing on, the big question we're really focusing on this weekend is, where should the balance of power lie between government and parliament? And a lot of the things we talked about yesterday show that actually there's a lot of differences about where that sort of overall balance of power lies. So I guess I'm just trying to remind you that when we're talking about where should the balance of power lie between government and parliament, we're not really talking about absolute, that it should be entirely in one camp or entirely with the other camp, but actually it's a longer scale. And there may be some types of decisions or some types of powers that you feel should be more with the responsibility of government, and government should have more ability to be sort of strong in those decisions, and some that maybe you'd like to see tend more towards having a wider parliamentary role. So just that reminder again of this kind of 6 key questions that Meg introduced yesterday afternoon and are going to be the focus of really what we're discussing today. Of these different areas, different aspects of governing and making decisions, and where that balance falls between government and parliament, but also actually where it should. If we're talking about a good democracy in the UK that people want to live in, what should be the balance of power? But before we get into that discussion, I'm just going to remind you of some of the things we were talking about in weekend 2. If you remember, we were talking about what might be some of the reasons for limiting the power of a democratically elected government. And these 8, while there were some other ones suggested by members and are all there in the record as well, these were kind of 8 key reasons or potential reasons for choosing to want to limit the power of a democratically elected government. And when you were discussing these, there were 4 that you really focused in on across the different groups. And so what I'm going to share with you now is just some of the key themes that came out across all of the different groups around these ones that you focused in on. So if we're talking about this idea that decisions should have to be publicly explained and justified, and that's one reason for potentially limiting the power of government just to go on and do things. One of the key things that you came up with was this idea of transparency, so that actually the public are aware and can comment and have some choice there. And the points in sort of italics on the screen are quotes from the Jamboards and the notes that came out within your different groups. One of the other key themes that came out there was this idea of accountability, so that actually government has to actually explain and justify its decisions so that the public can hold them to account and question what's going on. Truth and honesty, that fundamental baseline that actually, that government should be putting out their reasons and doing that in an honest and transparent way. And also just that idea of public understanding, so that the public do have a wider understanding of why certain decisions are being made, even if they don't agree with them. The second one you focused on was this idea of politicians fulfilling their manifesto commitments. And, the themes that sort of came out in the discussion there was, it's the voters' decision. Voters voted a government in, and therefore there's an expectation that they will deliver on some things that they promised. That it is this thing about sort of being honest and frank, that actually be truthful with the electorate. If you're saying you're going to do something, there was an expectation on people from members that actually that is what the government should deliver, unless, seriously circumstances change. Accountability again, because actually, you voted for them, therefore you expect them to do what you voted for. And public trust. So again, these themes emerging all the time about some of the reasons that we might want to consider putting limits on what a government can do once they've been elected. There was another one that was focused on, again, very much about that operating within agreed standards of good behaviour. It links back to some of these things about trust and honesty. But again, that theme of accountability, that actually there needs to be a way of holding those in power to account for what they're delivering for us. The idea that there should be sanctions if people are stepping outside of what are sort of accepted, agreed standards of good behavior. And also so that there is that level of consistency, that actually, there's consistency between how politicians act and how other people are expected to act if they're in sort of public roles as well. And the fourth one there that was focused on was that actually there are some basic features of sort of our democratic system that it should be difficult for governments to change. And that idea of limiting the power of government to fundamentally change important parts of the system without having wider accountability, scrutiny, and involvement. So, a level of that sort of controlling power, so it doesn't get out of, just because you've been elected doesn't mean you necessarily have uncontrolled power. The democratic principles, the things that actually, are important to keep our democracy functioning. And again, consistency, so that it's not just once an elected government's there focusing on the short term, but actually the longer term benefits for the country. So again, these are some of the things when we're thinking about some of the reasons we might want to limit government, that you might start thinking moving more towards the Parliament side, or actually thinking, no, there are still those things that government, once elected, needs to have that strength or the power to actually implement. So yesterday, you were talking about, what are the pros and cons of a strong or a stronger Parliament? And we took these last night from the different Jamboards that all the groups were working on, and a whole range of ideas that you were coming up with yesterday afternoon about what could be the benefits or the pros, the positives of having a strong or a stronger Parliament. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but there was lots of things there about, keeping government with that sort of large majority in check, a sort of check and balance there, the accountability, which again came up in your discussions last weekend, the range of voices that are there for able to sort of be involved and be influencing. And there was definitely emphasis across some of the groups about, more of the country is actually represented, that more of the elected representatives actually are playing a role in informing and shaping decisions, and that minority groups particularly might be more represented, or at least have their interests expressed and argued for. I'll just give you a second to read across some of these other ones that came from the different groups. But at the same time as thinking about some of the pros around this, the positives, you were also identifying some of the risks or the cons, the negatives, the things that concerned if actually, that idea of a strong or stronger Parliament potentially went too far. So everything there that ranged from, Parliament just being actually overwhelmed, there being too much to discuss, if Parliament was sort of setting an agenda and trying to raise everything that seemed important across the public. Practical things, more resources, costing money, costing time. It could become a sort of barrier, a speed hump that prevented government from fulfilling, delivering on election pledges or other policy matters. And a concern from some that actually, that then, might lead to a situation where minority opinions get too much influence. And if actually a government's being elected by majority, then, they should be allowed to get on with it. So these are the types of things that we're starting to really have to balance out when we're thinking about, are we looking, in an ideal world for good democracy, are we looking at strong or stronger governments, strong or stronger parliaments? So again, what you're going to be looking at when we go into the breakout room shortly are across these sort of 6 key questions that Meg posed, which get down to the heart of some of these decisions. And just before we do that, I just want to give a little bit more sort of idea around these. And as we said, if we're looking at sort of strong government on one side, strong parliament on the other side, these are some of the key differences about what this sort of means. So that first question A was really thinking about, if we're thinking about policy decisions, about government being able to sort of get on with a lot of the day-to-day work of governing, that in the strong government situation, we've got this idea that government makes policy decisions without being slowed down by needing to explain or present it all to Parliament. Alternatively, with a stronger Parliament, Parliament's scrutinising and questioning these policy decisions and ensuring that public visibility and transparency. And these are the types of arguments that push towards either end of this sort of scale of where the balance should fall. And if you think that the middle of the scale is kind of like, it's not necessarily where we are now, it's not about change from this, it's about if there was a perfect balance, which may or may not be possible in reality, but actually most of the time we need to be thinking, in which case should we be maybe more towards a stronger government or maybe more towards a stronger Parliament? I'm not necessarily going to read these all out to you. You'll have a chance when you're in the breakout rooms to have a look, but you can see, hopefully by looking at the screen here, that the two sort of moving towards different sides of the argument for where the balance should fall. So just before we put you into the breakout rooms, I just want to give you a little bit of information about what you're going to be doing once you get into those rooms. Okay, so you're going to be spending time with your groups exploring really what are the factors or the types of considerations that you take into account when thinking about what should be the balance of power between Parliament and government. So not just going, actually, it should be stronger Parliament or stronger government, but what are the things that are making you think that way? Whether we should have a stronger Parliament able to deliver that sort of high level of scrutiny and challenge and be part of setting the agenda and determining what's debated when Parliament sits, all of those questions we're asking. Or actually, whether on some things, it feels like the balance towards a strong or a stronger government able to get things done with sort of minimal interference and actually set their policy agenda seems the right way to be going. And we're not necessarily looking for you to come up with detailed, implementable, specific recommendations for changing parliamentary procedures or government rules. We're not expecting you suddenly to have become parliamentary or government experts. Although you may have some really specific ideas, and that's great. Bring them forward in your discussion groups. What we really are asking you to do is reflect on what you've heard and what you know and what you think and what you feel seems right, to explore, I suppose, those principles of what might be best for a good democracy in the UK. And there is, when you start thinking about this and start discussing, a whole range of different factors that you might, as individuals or as groups, be considering in different circumstances, and when looking at some of these sort of different trade-offs in this balance of power. It could be that you're thinking about things like the number of people that are affected by a type of decision. Does that mean that actually there should be a bigger role for Parliament coming in if actually something's going to affect a lot of people? It could be something around the level of impact or the degree of change, types of impacts it's going to have on people by a decision. It could be actually, rather than being about sort of large numbers, it could be that actually a particular decision or a particular rule might have specific effects on sort of specific minority groups whose voices maybe aren't being heard. Where does the balance there in terms of scrutiny and accountability come in? Or different things. It could be, the economic costs. The costs or benefits to the country from a certain decision could mean that actually you think it needs to be more strongly weighted, stronger government taking these types of decisions or more involvement of Parliament. Could be something to do with urgency. We talked a few examples there around sort of, are there different cases where actually it feels that the balance of power could shift if there is, as we've seen, public health emergency around COVID. Or it could be principles around what seems fair, what seems transparent, what seems accountable, the types of things that you were raising at the end of Weekend 2. And ultimately, what we're not asking you to make is not a choice between either a strong Parliament or a strong government, but thinking about where the balance falls. And so when you're thinking about each of the specific questions, you may end up with an entirely different answer. And on that basis, I'm going to ask for the breakout rooms to be open. We're going to leave you in there for just over 40 minutes now, so time to really get a good, solid conversation going, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Okay, so it looks like the breakout rooms are still disclosing. Looks like we've got almost everyone back. Hopefully you've enjoyed and had some time to sort of get into some of these topics and start sort of making sense of some of the information that we've been talking about and some of the questions that we're asking for. So we're going to now have the opportunity to hear back from some of yourselves, some of the members of the Assembly, about the discussions they're having there, and focusing in. We've been asked each group to sort of focus in sort of different ways to give us not a whole summary of their entire conversation, but to really think in feedback about one or two sort of key factors, key considerations that you were talking about and that you were finding as being either sort of particularly persuasive or particularly important for either looking where things maybe are moving towards the need for a stronger Parliament, in what type of circumstances, or is it around specific types of decisions and powers, or alternatively, a strong and able to act sort of government or executive. So I am going to call quite sort of random orders of the groups. Sorry about that, but I'm going to start with group 5, and I think we've got Claire from group 5 who is going to be feeding back for us.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so yep, we had a good chat about the power where or how much power Parliament should have. There were a few viewpoints within the room. Some people felt that Parliament should have more power at certain key times. For instance, in emergency situations. Others felt that it should still be, or it should be a 50-50 split, but with more governance to ensure that that was adhered to. And others felt, and actually this became sort of quite a strong theme in the room, that the Parliament itself should be a much fairer representation and a cross-section of society, because at the moment it felt it was more sort of elitist. So that's where we were in a nutshell.
Okay, no, thanks very much, Claire. I'm going to ask Graham now from group 6, if you're able to sort of give us a bit of a flavour on some of the things that seem particularly important or persuasive when thinking about the balance of power.
Yeah, so sort of mostly D was our sort of discussions, and there was broad agreement that just about on balance, like the government should have like the majority of control, but the exact amount varied from, just about having control over what was discussed to, the sort of the majority, 2/3, 3/4. All agreed that there was a voice like for Parliament, and that was necessary. One suggestion was that Parliament could control the number of days that government have to control the agenda, and then government would select what business was done on those particular days. But then that led to discussions about the nature of the committee that would decide that and how that would be dominated by the majority party.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Graham. And again, it's really interesting to see the types of things that are coming up across the different groups. Group 7, I think we've got John. John, are you there?
Try again. Hello.
There you are. Yep.
Sorry. Yeah.
Right.
We were looking at A, and we were discussing the power which the government has. And there were various views on this regarding the fact is that because at the moment, an example was given with the COVID situation, that the government actually moved too slowly, and that it should have taken expert advice earlier, and that would have been a reduction in the horrendous number of people who lost their lives. And a comparison was made with New Zealand, where they actually closed the country down. And the majority of our group felt that this was more economic pressure to try and keep the economy going rather than the concern for the social aspects.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is that they believed that Parliament should have come in as a cross-section to protect the minority, and again, there were several views that people felt that it was the on party policy that the Tories were more concerned with the affluent and the rich, and the lesser. One lady from one person said the lesser classes were rejected, which I find a little bit difficult to say, but that was. And when we looked, it was. The majority of people did feel that the government should have had more powers to act quickly, and it was ranging from about 4.5 to 8, if that, on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, so balancing up these trade-offs, there's so many different factors that you have to
There
take
is,
into
yeah,
account.
and again, it depends on people's political slant, and I'm not saying, again, whatever thing people are doing. There isn't a perfect scenario, and I think people came to think to that. But just the other one concern is that it's being flagged up now that are we in for a third spike, and should we now react quicker without closing the economy down?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely the recent pandemic or ongoing public health crisis has definitely thrown some of these questions into sort of clear relief for people, I think. So. Thanks, John. That's great.
Okay.
From group 8, can we have, I think we've got Innocent. Are you there?
Hi, group 8. Me and my group, we were more keen on giving the government a little more power when proposing bills and what to be discussed. So we looked at saying the government comprises of elected parliament, the parliament which we elect the citizens. Yeah, so the government comprises of integrated ideas, collective ideas from their constituency and from their various places where they're coming from. So otherwise, looking at saying putting the power close to the parliament is going to take more time and more money. I know we did consider creating a committee to actually let private bills being instead of granting power to the government to be proposing private bill, we could actually do a committee for them to propose private bill. But also looking at the amount of private bill that might actually been introduced and the time it takes for it to go through all the reading, I'm pretty sure that will actually cause a really slow breakdown in democracy, or even making it move forward too. So that's why we're actually keen on giving the government more power to actually propose the bill.
Yeah, so that balance between, having the space to be controlled, but also being able to get things done and not being, the time, as you were talking about there as well. It's a key trade-off.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks, Innocent. That was great. Can we go to group 2? And I think we've got Doreen.
Hi.
Hiya.
Hi. We were looking at proposing bills and whether or not that should be left to the government or the Parliament should have the right to do this. We came up with the thought that even though we've got an elected government, a lot of people didn't vote for this government, so they should still have a voice, and that voice should be heard via their MPs in the House of Commons.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, definitely sort of giving that space for everyone to be represented.
Mm-hmm. And we also felt quite strongly that there shouldn't be procedural blocking time allowed by the government.
Okay.
That didn't seem fair.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that, sorry, did I cut you off, Doreen, or was that you?
No, that's it. That's it.
Great. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, Janet, I think you're feeding back from group 3, aren't you?
I am actually not, because the very brave Steve has just messaged me in the chat to say he'll do it. So over to Steve.
Fantastic, Steve. Let's hear from you.
Hello, everyone. Yes, we decided to look at who had the power to call elections. I think the general opinion in the room was that Parliament should have that role, but there was a counter on that. One of the concerns was that putting the power in one person's hands, which would be the Prime Minister, could lead to misuse of that power. Obviously, we've seen it in the past where they will go to the country when their opinion poll is looking good, so that they have a better chance of getting into power, and that could be misused. We did mention about a 5-year fixed Parliament, you know, where, like in America, where the elections are held religiously at a set date, and that could be a fairer way. There was one viewpoint which I thought was quite good, was where it was mentioned that if the Prime Minister or his government are getting a lot of flack from Parliament, and it may be fair that the Prime Minister might say, well, let's take it to the country. Let's see what the people think. Parliament doesn't agree with me. You're giving me loads of flack. Let's go to the country. And so perhaps the Prime Minister might be right to have that power then to call that. So it was, but it generally felt that power should be with that decision should be with Parliament.
Okay. So yeah, really interesting, because there's those different trade-offs and different circumstances where actually something that generally feels one way, you can often find that exceptional circumstance that something, you know, might have to be different as well.
So if I missed anything, Janet, you can gladly fill in.
No, not at all. It's, I think if anybody in the group wants to add anything, they could do, but that sounds like a fair summary to me.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to come to group 4 now, and I think we've got Alison and Adrian.
Hello, I'm Alison. I'm just making a point that not everyone else agreed with, but a couple of us sort of thought was valid. In a good democracy, we would have an unbiased media, and we'd have an unbiased national broadcaster employing people from different thoughts and different perspectives, and we would have academics or charities that are representing both sides of the aisle. So at the moment, I don't think we do have we don't have a fair discussion with the public. So the people they're electing maybe are very biased one way, and we've got a very strong woke agenda in this country. So that's why at point 1, I felt, and some of us did, that Parliament would play to the politically correct aspects of government over government itself. And government itself is okay, it's evil, it's behind closed doors, but it's not being wagged by a Marxist agenda that I see all around this country. And at the moment, the majority are silenced in the House of Parliament, and the government is the only bad thing we've got that's acting well for the majority. And so that was my view, and another person's.
Yeah, look, we know we're going to all have very different views around this, and it's interesting where you were picking up on some of the sort of media and the people and some of these things that are those powers and people who have influence outside of the actual sort of elected governments or parliaments are some of the things we're definitely going to be picking up on over the next week or 2 as well. So it'd be interesting to get into those conversations then. And I know, Adrian, you were feeding back on another aspect of the discussion, yeah?
The chosen topics that were chosen by the majority was A and C, which was around the ability to make policies, and C was around the area of making bills. It was largely felt by the group that government should be allowed to do this, and the distribution of power should lean more towards the government, because the government has been chosen to rule the country by a majority vote, and it should be allowed to do so. If it had to go through the Parliament body for everything that it did, then it would be rather cumbersome, slow and costly. However, it must be bear in mind that this would be a very idealistic position in an ideal world, whereby the government was open and trustworthy, and it was largely felt that the trust between the government and its people was largely absent.
Yeah, and it's one thing where we're talking about what the system should be like, and what the system as you said, in that ideal world, and then it's sometimes really hard to move away from whatever views you might have about the particular governments we have, rather than the systems as a whole. And that's one of the challenges when we're having these conversations, to just try and get our heads out of the particular governments that are sort of in place at the moment, whether that's UK-wide or in any of the devolved nations, and everyone will have their own views on whether they're doing a good job or not. Thank you very much, Adrian and Alison from Group 4. Could I come to Andy now from Group 9?
Good morning. As a group, we managed to discuss the first 4, and how we sort of generally, we agreed that the first one, the power should be slightly more towards Parliament, because it gives them the ability to check and scrutinise what the government is doing. The second one will be, we went slightly more towards the government, towards the Parliament, because they need the ability to stop or prevent, you'll forgive me if I waffle a little bit, they need the ability to prevent the government from bringing in laws that are detrimental to society, minorities, etc., etc. So we gave them the reaction there was ranged from sort of a 6.5 through to a 9, where Parliament should have the strength. On the C and D, we tended to go slightly more towards the government, because with C, they have to have the ability to fulfill their manifesto promises, so they need to be able to put forward what's being discussed slightly more. And again, the same with D. The government needs the ability to get its promises through, so that the electorate can say, oh, look, they're actually doing a good job. So in general, the group was in agreement. You had a range of variation. Some were quite distant, more towards government, and some were slightly more towards, some were higher power for Parliament, and some were slightly more. We're not giving the government massive, nobody got down to a 2 or a 1 in favour of the government. It sort of ranged around the 4 to 5.5 mark. So in general, we feel that the first 2 give Parliament the ability to scrutinise government, and the second 2 give the government the ability to fulfil its promises.
Okay, thank you. Nice sort of clear summary there of where the perspective is going, and interesting that a lot of the people in your group seem to be, falling at least in the sort of same general directions, although across all the groups we're hearing from, we're still getting a really wide range of views and where this discussion's gone, so it's great. I'm going to come to Matt from Group 11 now.
Hi, everybody.
Hiya.
So we had a good discussion around sort of making laws and policy making. So on balance, we ended up around the middle of the chart, as you can see. Some of us felt that it should be nudged slightly towards Parliament, where others felt it should be nudged slightly towards government. One of the ideas that we discussed was some mechanism for deciding the level of scrutiny that individual government proposals might go through, whether that's Parliament itself deciding on some things should go through the full scrutiny route, whereas other less controversial things might get off a bit easier and be allowed to pass through with reduced scrutiny. Or perhaps some sort of panel that would score proposals on a level of 1 to 5, whereas at the extreme end you might go back to the public, and at the other end you might need the government to act very quickly on certain things. And one of the other things that we discussed was around how the voting system related to this as well. And perhaps if we had a situation where we had a more proportional voting system that ended up with a broader range of voices within government, that perhaps we might then feel more comfortable putting the balance of power towards government if it had that broader range of voices within it. One of the other things we looked at just briefly was on proposing bills as well, and we thought that 4 or 5 years was quite a long time for any one party to have a mandate for setting the agenda. So therefore we felt it was important to have a mechanism to introduce new business to the House. We felt that the current sort of ballot system wasn't a particularly great way of doing that, and what was discussed yesterday around having a committee within Parliament to decide what additional business could be brought in would be a better approach.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Nat. Lots of really interesting ideas coming out there from Group 11. And now I'm going to come to our final group. I think it's Group 10, and we've got Rachel.
Hi, our group looked at laws and legal changes and where the power lies with that. And as you can see, the majority we kind of come to was more Parliament. Yeah. I think this was because a lot of people within our group, obviously I can't talk for everyone, but felt that the government was untrustworthy because of certain events that have happened, such as Brexit, etc. So that the government needed that scrutiny from Parliament. Another thing we looked at was that the laws and legal contracts should be there for years, not just something that can be changed here and there. So the laws need that scrutiny, that level of detail looking into them, so that they can be around for years and years, not just like wishy-washy, oh yeah, we'll do that. We did have more in the middle, looking at the idea that if it was all towards Parliament, would we ever get anything done? Do we need that bit in the middle? But yeah, I think the majority of the group headed more towards Parliament due to the untrustworthy government. And also, I don't think it's on there, but we spoke about like, well, MPs and Parliament are more representative of people on a whole. Government are only representative of the people that voted for them. So I think that's possibly why we went towards Parliament, but yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Rachel. No, so that's actually all the groups that we've heard back from now, which is great. And if you're listening across these different topics that you've been talking about, lots of really interesting ideas, lots of really interesting things that you've been focusing on, and also still quite a lot of different opinions, which is also great. When we're going to go for a break in a moment. When we come back from the break, we are going to do another Menti poll. We've got a couple of little plans to help make it a bit easier for some people to get in, but we're going to do another poll, and it's going to be asking you again to look at these 6 questions and give a sense of where you personally, after the discussions in your groups and also listening to some of the feedback that's come out here, that may have raised different ideas that your group hadn't necessarily been talking about, or focused in on some of the different aspects that your group hadn't got a chance to talk about yet. So we're going to ask you to give your own view on each one. The votes, as we said yesterday, they're all anonymous. They're not final decisions either. You know, they're decisions to help us do the next stage of our discussion. But all of these things, once we've done all the learning and looked at all the different aspects over weekend 4 and weekend 5, we'll be coming back to in weekend 6 to really kind of go, all right, yeah, this is where we were feeling was a good idea in weekend 3, but actually now, you know, we may or may not have changed our minds. I'm just going to say this, and I'll say it when we come back from the break as well, but really interesting. A lot of you were sort of doing this sort of scale of sort of 1 to 10. When we do our vote, it's actually on a scale of 1 to 7. So just don't get yourself too fixed into 1 to 10s because you'll run out of voting options. All right, we're going to have a break and we will come back at 11. We will start again at 11:35. So actually you get 10.5 minutes this time for your break. And we'll speak to you all soon. As I said to you, we're going to do a bit of a sort of poll in the room now to get a sense of where everyone is sort of thinking in terms of where this sort of balance of power should lie. I think one of the things that I just want to sort of emphasize before we go into this poll is that we are talking about systems of democracy and democracy in the UK and what would be a good democracy in the UK. And it is hard to sometimes detach our views about what would work well for a system from what we might think about sort of individual politicians or individual governments at present. So although, people have expressed in the last feedback and other points, things about, lack of trust in individuals, lack of trust in certain parties, lack of faith that, they're looking out for people's interests, which is fair enough. And, everyone's entitled to have whatever view they have on sort of politics. But as much as you can, try and think about what would be good for the system when we go through this vote, because then there's also the types of caveats or the types of sort of conditions you might put on place in that can pick up some of the things around trust or honesty and some of these other questions that you might have had. So we're going to try the Mentimeter poll again. And we've got a couple of, just hopefully going to make this clear to people, make it a bit easier. I know we confused people a bit the way we showed the slide yesterday for some people. So what I've done is I have pasted a link into the chat that will take you straight to the first page of the Menti poll. If you are able to click on that link, it should open up straight away for you. The other thing we're doing is that the support team, for people we've been communicating with via text, has sent a text with the same link. So you could, if you find it difficult to get to it in the chat, you should hopefully have a text link that if you've got a sort of mobile phone, a smartphone that can go online, you should be able to click straight on that and it will take you straight to the first page. There is a third way, which I'll show you, that if you can't follow the link in the chat, or for some reason you haven't got the text, then what you can do is just go online, whether you do it on your phone or you do it, you can do it on your phone or you can do it on just another window on your computer or tablet, and go to, you just type in your browser there, I'll share it and show you. It's at the top of the screen here. It says www.menti.com. And I worked out why some people were having trouble yesterday. If you go to Mentimeter rather than www.menti.com, it asks you different things. So you need to go to this one and then put the code in 27642202. I can see quite a lot of people have got in there, lots of sort of thumbs up coming towards me. So we'll just give people another moment to ensure that they are able to get in. And if none of these work for you, if you still can't get into these ones, then the other option you have is, as we go through it, you can either send your answers to the support team either via the chat in Zoom or via text, and they'll add your answers in for you. So hopefully we'll get everyone this time. And if you still haven't managed, we can always add them in after, because these are not final votes and decisions. A few people joining us. I'll just let people have another moment to get in.
All I see is welcome to our mentor meeting for Sunday. I've got the code, but I can't do nothing.
You don't, if you're on the page that says, if you're on that, not just seeing it on my screen, not on the Zoom screen, but if you've got that yourself, that's as far as you need to go.
Okay. Well, I can't just thumbs up, but I'm in then.
Okay.
I believe.
I'm in, Keela.
Story. Yep. Good. I think we've got most people in, and I'm going to go on to our first question, which again is it's just a bit of a warm-up question for us. So let's go. Which would you rather wake up and find in your garden? A red squirrel, a lamb, or a tree growing slices of pizza? Few people definitely taking their time pondering this one. So you just choose your answer and then hit submit. A few more still to come. Anybody else still needing to answer? Okay. Definitely looking like we've got red squirrel fans in the room, and nowhere near as many people as I imagined who want just a ready supply of pizza in their garden. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Now, before I go on to the next question, these are the 6 questions that we've been keeping coming back to. As I said, each one is going to be on a scale from 1 to 7, which means if you're thinking a perfect balance, you'd be going for a 4. And depending on the nature of the question, you'll either be going for, a 1 might be sort of completely with the sort of government side, and a 7 would be completely with the sort of parliamentary side. Okay, so the first question we have for you is A. It's the one we had about policy making. Okay, so it's asking you, what do you think is the right balance between Parliament's ability to publicly scrutinise government decisions and government being able and getting on, and government getting things done? So if you think that it's actually government being free to get things done is like right down the end, on the government side, you'd be voting with a 1. If you were right in the middle, you'd be voting with a 4. And if you were more towards the end, completely parliamentary, you'd be voting with a 7, or anywhere in between along the scale.
Hi, Kayla, I don't know where I am.
We're just doing the polling at the moment. Andy, have you just rejoined us?
Yeah, every time we have a break and I leave the iPad, when I come back to it, it won't reconnect. I have to come out and go back in again.
Okay, well, we're just in the middle of the poll at the minute. You can see at the top of the screen, hopefully, that it's got the www.menti.com, or somebody else might be able to paste it in the chat, but you could join in and as we keep going forward. I'm going to go on to the next question now, which is, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the results. So, B, the question about making laws. To what extent should government be able to make laws without full parliamentary oversight? This is where we're talking about things like secondary legislation. So again, a 1 is sort of government free just to make laws, and the opposite end of the extreme, full parliamentary oversight, would be a 7. And if you think perfect balance, you'd be voting around 4.
I'm ever so sorry, but I've got it all up on my screen, but I can't see anywhere, because it's a tablet, I can't see anywhere where I can press to vote.
Are you still looking at the Zoom screen instead of going into a different, you might
I got that thing on about Mentimeeting. You said if you're on there, you're on the right screen. But I've also got it on my phone, and it's different questions they're asking on the phone than what you're asking.
You need to click a little thing at the top that says move to the next slide once we've moved on to the next question. That could be it if you're a question or 2 behind.
Right.
Yeah, maybe do it on the phone might be the easiest way. See, might move on. I'm going to move us to the next question. So this one's the one about proposing bills. So to what extent should Parliament be able to make laws independently of government? So again, at the 1 end of the scale, government can block Parliament's bills. And at the 7 end of the scale, Parliament free to pass bills.
Kyla, I do think some of these questions, the answer has got to be, it depends.
Yeah.
And that sort of subtlety is not really catered for, is it?
It's not. We are asking you to give us some indication where you feel. What we're going to be moving on to once we finish with the vote here is starting to dig into this is the sort of general sense, but actually there are exceptions or there are conditions or only in these types of cases. So I guess just try and bear with us for a bit and you'll get the chance to sort of add some of those conditions in shortly. Okay, I'm going to go on to question D. So this is the one about what is discussed. Where should the balance of power lie between government and parliament in determining what the House of Commons gets to discuss and when? Again, you know, completely with government or completely with parliament at the other end of the scale. Okay. And now on to you, you're going to know what's coming next. Question E, same sort of thing. When Parliament meets, so that's one of the other questions we've been talking about. Where should the balance of power lie in between government and Parliament when deciding when Parliament goes on a break and when it's recalled? Completely with government or completely with Parliament?
Honestly, feel like those two should be separate questions.
Yeah, I can see the rationale for that. Unfortunately, I've put them up here together. And I guess it really is about the sort of decision making about about just deciding when Parliament sits, really.
Yeah, but ending it rather than starting it up are very significant changes.
You're right. You're right. We possibly should have put them up separately, and we can, when we go into the discussions, we can definitely look at, there may be different answers around, you know, where these are falling.
The sensible thing would be to give the Prime Minister power to end Parliament, but Parliament the power to recall it in the event it needs to be there.
Well, you can debate that in the group, so I'm not getting into an answer on that one now. F, calling elections. Where should the balance of power lie between government and Parliament when it comes to calling elections? And a final question, which again, I know some of you are not going to like, but if you had to make a decision overall on balance, you know, where do you feel the balance of power should lie overall between Parliament and government in a good democracy? And again, this is about just sort of taking the temperature across the room of what the range of different views and opinions are. Do you want to see the results?
Yes, please.
So let's start with this final one, where, yeah, the balance is so broadly in the middle there, just slightly veering towards Parliament side. But again, you can see from the light blue, you've got the range of views across the room from people who are firmly that it should be completely with Parliament, and people who are completely that power balance should lie completely with government. General elections, again, we're big, sort of average around the middle, but just slightly moving towards more the balance of power lying with Parliament. But again, a range of views right across the spectrum. Again, moving slightly more towards the Parliament side, just over half. If you remember that 4 is our midpoint. So, you know, we're at sort of just over 4.6. Again, slightly veering towards the balance falling more with Parliament. So deciding what the House of Commons gets to discuss and when. Again, we're sort of falling again quite in the middle, but we've got quite a range of views. But again, just veering towards a more responsibility or a more balance of power with Parliament. Pretty much the same result there on to what extent should Parliament be able to make laws independently of government. We are veering slightly. Oh, coming down as people are catching up with the vote. It's good. Yes, so again, just over half, just over the sort of 50% towards the parliamentary side. Okay, so far this is the one that's moved furthest towards a sort of responsibility with Parliament or power with Parliament. There's full parliamentary oversight when we're talking about the extent should government be able to make laws without full parliamentary oversight. Definitely there's a shift towards the parliamentary side. And the first one that you answered, unhide. Oh, very, very close to right in the middle on this one. What's the right balance between Parliament's ability to publicly scrutinise government decisions and government getting things done? So, hopefully, what we're going to now go into is the breakout groups. Each group has been allocated one or two of the questions to really focus on, so that across all of the groups, we will cover the 6 different questions. What we're going to ask you to do is to sort of work with your group to start thinking about some of those, use what we've seen from the results here and start thinking about, well, what are some of the kind of conditions? What are the types of things that you would expect in a good democracy in the UK for government, for that balance between government and Parliament? These are being drafted up by sort of the individual groups, and they'll get shared with you all later. Just because one group's written something doesn't mean it's going to be the end up result of the assembly, but starting to get a sense of the range of things that people are concerned about. And when we do come back to start finalising decisions later in the process, this will be the base that we start from. And we can decide whether as an assembly at that point, you either agree or disagree with some of the proposals. So we're going to open up breakout rooms and I'll see you just before we finish at 12:30. Okay, so it looks like everyone's back from the breakout rooms, or everyone back from the breakout rooms now. Again, that's it. We've got to the end of weekend 3. We're starting to form some conclusions, and we're going to keep building on these over the next couple of weekends that we meet, till really by the time we get to weekend 6, we're going to have a clear picture of what your sort of preferences and priorities and sort of recommendations, I suppose, for actually having a good democracy in the UK.